Morning. As per the title, we're here for a drive shaft build today, so roll the intro. Okay, so for a quick update where we left off last time, we've now installed the DTurbo engine into a Peugeot Partner. We've assembled the clutch system. Unfortunately, the 230mm Citroen Evasion clutch, which I had put high hopes on for getting the RPM counter correct, did not fit. So I've gone away, I've done my research, and it turns out I should have had 3mm machined off that flywheel, enabled to reduce the clutch pack height and get it into the BE3 box. Didn't do that, so I abandoned that theory and I've gone to the DTurbo clutch, which is it's a direct fitting clutch for the BE3 box. It's what that engine would have come with. However, that in turn comes with its own problems because now I won't have a working RPM counter. I've set things in motion to be able to correct that. I've gone down the route of trying to look up these sensors and stuff like that, and there's just no way to really cheat that system. So I'm going down what I would refer to as a more old school route, and that is I have spoken to a friend who usually does my water jet cutting and stuff like that for me. Some people have probably heard him mentioned on this channel before, but until that product is finished, I won't mention his name. But I'll be looking at having a trigger wheel. So a trigger wheel like what you would use for petrol ignition timer and stuff like that. Going to look at having something like that bolted onto the end of the crank pulley and then moving the VR sensor, what should be on top of the gearbox, down to the bottom of the crank pulley. It's a bit of a fucking far-fetched and a long-winded way of doing it, but it's the only way I can now see to reliably get this RPM counter and wake the clocks up. So you'll have to stick with me on that one, and we'll see if that system works. I've got a lot of confidence in it, to be honest. I had this theory laid out in my head once before. Wasn't really something I wanted to go down the route of doing because I don't like the idea of the sensor being on the bottom of the engine like that and being exposed, but in this case I've got no other options and I've exhausted everything else now. So onto the drive shafts today. So I said onto the drive shafts, but first we'll just take a look at where we've actually left the van off as well. So I have shoehorned the engine in now. The inner wings have all been repainted and everything, and this is pretty much how we're sitting at the moment. So as you can see, everything's starting to go in. The intercooler at the moment is just dummied in there. That's all got to come back off. But I'll try and rest this on my head. Rest the bonnet on my head. At the moment, we are only on 2 engine mounts. So engine mounts of choice are Baker BM. So we're going for a full Baker BM engine mount set up, the Group N. We've also got the gear linkages hidden down the back there, which I've stupidly not connected yet, so they've still got to be connected in. And then I've still also got the lower engine mount to put in. But so that's pretty much how the van is sat at the moment. I did a lot of that progress off camera because I was that disheartened after the clutch. I just wanted to make some progress then again. It was nearly half a day I lost to actually trying to sort out a clutch system for that. And for anyone asking, like in my last video I did cover that I would have rather have used the 200mm setup in the end and had the friction plate converted to a paddle clutch. The reason I couldn't do that is, as you can see there, one of the wings were broken off that flywheel by the previous owner, and now I've hunted eBay for one of these flywheels and I just cannot find a replacement. So that's why I went straight to the DTurbo clutch. Now I am aware that a lot of the lads who have done that conversion as well have also used the DTurbo pull style clutch. So if I can sort this situation out with the trigger wheel, it might be something I can actually offer to people in the future as well. So fingers crossed on that one. But right, now let's get to this. Right, so I've now laid out the drive shafts on the floor so we can actually compare them. So now, this top one is the original DW8 one. So that was a new one I put in the van just before a previous MOT. This one we've got here is an old DTurbo shaft, what I've had sat in my stockpile. So, just to cover the fundamental basics, we have got DW8 shaft, that is shorter than a 306 shaft. The size difference comes in this shaft here. The hub fitting is exactly the same because the DW8 uses 306 based hubs. And then the gearbox fitting on the long shaft is identical as well. So we have identical spline count, identical length into the box, identical fitting there, and identical fitting on the support bearing. So that is the same distance from there to there on both shafts. So officially, for the long shaft, you can literally just use the DW8 shaft. Moving on to the shorter shaft, this is where things need to become a little bit custom. So I say a little bit custom, it's not pushing the boat out too far here. So this one here is the original DW8 shaft this time. When we start comparing the inner CV, they are slightly different. Spline count is exactly the same, but as you can see here, we have got a different length on the stub which goes inside of the differential, inside of the gearbox housing, and the DW8 one actually sits slightly too far into the gearbox. Now, when we look at a DW8 gearbox, so that is this one over here, the casting on the housing for the diff is just ever so slightly different. So I think that's the contributing factor to the length here. So straight away, to get one of these drive shafts fitting on the DTurbo gearbox, we're going to at least need the inner CV cup. And then we look at everything else, and it's exactly the same story on this shaft as it was this previous one, where this for the DW8 is slightly shorter. So what we've got to do is split the inner CV off here, split one of these shafts, and then amalgamate the two. So you'll take this end and put it onto that CV cup, and then bang. It's as easy as that. That is literally going to be the Frankenstein shaft which is needed for the DTurbo DW8 conversion. So I've took it one step further because this 306 shaft I've got here is reasonably new. This actually came out of my sedan, but anyone who knows JR shaft quality will also know that the cups perish out really quickly. So when I last had the engine out of the sedan, I noticed that these boots had started to perish. So that was just removed before it had the chance to fail. What I'm going to do with this one, so I've got a brand new DW8 shaft over there, and then that will give me all the components I need to build this shaft up as well. I did actually buy a box of spare parts, but it turns out it's not needed. So all we'll do is we'll cut through that, we'll save that inner CV cup, we'll take the new one, and we'll basically do exactly the same, pop the boot off, and then we'll use everything from the new shaft onto the old CV cup. So that should be absolutely ideal. And then somewhere in there we should have that single Frankenstein shaft we need. So again, just to finish that off and clarify it, long shaft, DW8, can use that perfectly fine as is. Short shaft, you need the CV inner cup from the 306 along with the rest of the shaft from the DW8. Ice cream. But yeah, so it's not too much in the way of custom work, luckily. It's slightly annoying you can't use anything off the shelf, but I've had reports from other people when they've used 306 shafts. I think the difference is about 3 centimetres, 30mm in the length. When people have used the 306 ones, they've found that anything beyond standard ride height, they start binding out, bottoming out the CV joints. So, right, let's crack on then. Okay, so I probably should be doing this in a cleaner environment, but so far all I've done is just knock this clip off, and it's the first time I've ever done a CV gate, boot or anything of the sort, to be honest, so don't really know what to expect. I don't know if I'm going to pull this off in a second and all the bearings are just going to eject, but does that just come out? I genuinely don't know. I might have to go explore this one off camera because I don't know how to get that out of there. I always thought it was a case of just giving it a tug. It's amazing when you do this on the car any other time, these seem to pop out when you can't get the bastards back in, but... Okay, right, I'll go play with this off camera and I'll report back. Okay, so it took a few minutes to actually figure this one out, but ended up being a lot simpler than I thought, and that was, there was a hidden snap ring in amongst all that CV grease. So literally, I could not pop those bearings out until I just put a screwdriver in there and just pinged that out. So easy as that. Literally, as soon as that was pinged out with a screwdriver, no effort at all, and the cup just pulled straight off. So I'm now going to move on to what's going to be my good shaft and basically replicate the same process and then put the new cup on. So that should then give me the 306 CV with the DW8 outer shaft. Okay, so this one's now turned into a bit of an interesting turn of events. So this is the DW8 shaft ordered from JR Shafts on eBay. This is a 306 inner cup, and if we do the comparison, they're the bloody same. So I'm not actually quite sure what's going on here. I'm going to pop the shaft out of the vise in a second and we will double check that. But if we move back to this actual DW8 shaft, which come off the van, we can see and notice the difference. So this is the difference and the issue I was having with trying to offer this shaft into the DTurbo gearbox, whereas this one was a direct fit. So yeah, I don't really know what to say, what's going on here. So basically I've just split that CV potentially for nothing, because I can't actually see the difference in between these two inner CV cups now. I'll have to test this in the gearbox just to make sure. And again, as I was saying, I'm going to have to check this length up against the DW8 shaft. So we'll free this out of the vise and we'll go lay it down. So this one's actually pretty frustrating. I've laid all the drive shafts out now so we can actually compare. So that's original DW8. We know that that inner cup does not fit a DTurbo gearbox properly. The second one is now the JR replacement shaft, which is brand spanking new out of the box. And then the third one at the top there is a 306 drive shaft. It's the one I've just split, and for argument's sake here, I've now put the inner CV back on, put the clip back on it so we can actually compare the length and make sure we haven't been sent a 306 shaft there. But so to start off with the comparisons, straight away you can see that these two are different. Shank length here is different, so this is 306 styling in a cup. Slight differences on the length of that, and then if we do that, we know they're the same length. We can indeed confirm that both these drive shafts are the same length, so it's slightly difficult to tell because of like the style of cups and stuff like that going on here, but they are both the same length. So both DW8 length, though that seems to be wearing a 306 in a CV. So we move on to the 306 drive shaft back here. Now we'll do the same. Just need to square that off a little bit. So there we go. Both the same style of cup. I've already confirmed that one. Move up. So it's a little bit hard to tell here because I've squished that boot up. But if we clean that up, it says DS81 and this has got DS133. So these two inner shafts are different part numbers, which means we are confirming the length difference there. We move to the end and we can see that length difference now on the end of this cup. So these are basically the same style cups, slightly different pickup here, but yes, we're now confirming that the DW8 one is indeed shorter. But it's frustrating because I began taking that 306 one apart, working with the original DW8, and we know that should be different. However, JR seemed to be using the 306 in a CV there, so I don't really know what to say on that one, to be honest. We're not going to know that 110% fits until we offer it into the gearbox. But I have already offered one of these cups into the gearbox to know it fits and to know that this one does not. So working on that assumption, that DW8 shaft is a plug and play item now. So I'm not going to lie to you, that's something I wasn't expecting to find. I've heard some of the lads doing this swap have said they're plug and play. I've heard plenty of others saying no, it's not, that the DW8 and the DTurbo shafts are different. Now, we know in terms of that the length is different. We can confirm the length is different. But it's now looking like you can literally go and buy JR shafts off the shelf to do this conversion. So as long as you're buying the DW8 JR shafts, literally looks like they're plug and play. Hadn't anticipated that personally. It's good news for me because one of the JR shafts I've got there, the long shaft, is brand new anyway. It's probably done about 500 miles since the last MOT. And then the other one, what I've bought today, I now haven't got to chop up to make a hybrid shaft. So, yeah, I guess it's some good news, even though the other frustrating part is because I've been working off forum information and stuff like that and actually working with the facts what I had laying there on the floor, it's another couple of hours been wasted on this conversion where I could have been doing something else. So for the want of actually using my time more wisely, we're going to get back on with the van now. Now, this engine has literally been dumped in. When we put it in, I put 10mm fuel line straight in onto the existing pipes with an 8mm return. Now the 8mm return is already plumbed up. That's all sorted in here. We've got the injector return lines and everything like that, so the return system is already hooked in. Now as for the main feed in, 10mm fuel pipe is actually larger than the factory DTurbo XUD stuff, which is usually 8mm. So put this pipe in, obviously. When I come to trying to fit the original primer bulb, I then found it was too small. So this is just a 10mm primer bulb, which I've got to chop and put in the system there. And yeah, everyone knows what these manual primer bulbs do. Let's not suck eggs. The other thing, got a couple of magnetic sump bungs. So before I start filling up with oil, I want to turn around and just put them in the bottom of the sump with new crush rings. So we've got one for the sump, we've got one for the gearbox. For anyone wanting to know, I believe the sump one is an M14 maybe, and I think that one was an M16. Don't know, I can't exactly read Chinese, so helpful. And then yeah, the final thing there is just a manual boost controller to go on. So I've already dragged 2 boost lines straight up from the turbo, from the GT15, so I can actually crank that up at a later date. To begin off with, I'm going to soften that manual boost controller right off, because we don't actually have a boost gauge in yet. I've still got to go through the system and actually work out where I can add a boost gauge in. I have just noticed there's a lovely little grommet hole under there. I don't know where that leads, so that might be a case of taking the scuttle panel off and seeing if that goes inside of the dash. But if that does, that could be the one I end up using, so that will need some investigation later. But then, apart from that, it's just odds and sods to tie up, really. So we come down the back here. As I said, I've got Baker BM gear linkages, but again, as you can see, we've not fitted them on yet. I've got the top mount intercooler on. I still need to put the breather line on, or touching the fuel filter housing. Still need to put the breather line on with the PCV valve, so that's got to go in. I've got a gasket to go in the intercooler, so at the moment this is just resting on for looks, but that's got to come back off. And then we've got to finish off actually wiring the front half of the engine up. So we've got 90% of it on the back of the engine already, which was the harder to get to stuff. And then we've just got to finish off by doing the starter motor wiring. There was a plug which got smashed when the engine went pop. I don't know if we can actually find it now. It's one of these ones anyway, but yeah, there was a plug what got smashed, which was for the, can't remember what that is, oil pressure switch. So we've got the DW8 oil pressure switch on there. Like I said, we've got alternator to do. We've got the wiring for the fuel pump. That's nothing too major. That's just going to be a switched ignition live, hopefully bypassing the immobiliser in the ECU for now. And I suppose the other thing to touch upon is just the situation with this coolant pipe here. So the DW8 has exactly the same coolant pipe, which comes from here and it returns straight into the top of the expansion bottle. Now, on the XUD, it actually tees in back to the cylinder head up here. So an XUD pipe will typically come down and it will have the tee in here to then return into the radiator. Now, I didn't have an actual intact XUD pipe, one of these, so I swapped this out because the DW8 ones don't have this bleed nipple. So I've put the bleed nipple in the system, should make bleeding the coolant system easier. I've then put a brass T-piece in there and I'll cut the bottom of the DW8 one off, and then that will go into the expansion bottle. But apart from that, this is pretty all self-explanatory stuff to be plumbing in. And then yeah, depending on how we get on for time today, I might end up putting the drive shafts in, but I've got to admit, today isn't a day for cooking big things. So the reason for that is the usual story: come off night shift, got to pick my daughter up later from school, so it's just going to be a case of moseying on and seeing how much I now get done. So no time like the present, I'm going to get on with it. So this isn't going to look like too much progress has been made, to be honest. But so what we've essentially done, we've got the gear linkages down the bottom sorted. I've now changed over all the sump plugs and everything. I've now finalised the fuel plumbing, which ended up having to have a sheared bolt drilled out, retapped, all that fun stuff. So I've got my fuel lines routed a lot better now. Got my prime and bulb in. She's doing a thing. You can't actually see it pumping diesel through because I've already pumped it. But so that's pretty much ready for the intercooler to go on. The only balls up I've made is that the PCV valve, what I need for here, I've locked inside of the car, of course, and I didn't bring the keys with me. So intercooler's going to have to go on another day. What we'll do is we'll plug the inlet up and everything like that, and we will come back to that one. But then other things on top of that, we've now got the lower engine mount on, so She is absolutely rock solid in there now. Not really sure how much this is actually going to vibrate in the end, because as I said earlier, we're on those Baker BM Group N engine mounts, which, yeah, they're solid in a 306, but in a van application could be hellish. Apart from that, it's pretty much standard stuff, just been tidying up. Haven't finalised where my manual boost controller is going to go yet, but so I've just slung that on in the correct orientation, and yeah, basically there's just a few little tiny bits left to button up. But unfortunately that's as far as I can come today with the time constraints I've got. So I still need to put the drive shafts in. We've still got an exhaust system to make. There's lots of other bits and pieces to go on. We've still got to put all the front end back on, the coolant system and stuff like that. So it's slowly getting there. It stays like this where I don't feel like I make much headway, but I am still nibbling away at little bits and pieces. And it's the little bits and pieces on these projects which build for the bigger picture. Apart from that, I'm going to have to call it there today, so I'm now going to tidy away and everything, and that'll be me done for the day. Next video, don't really know what we're going to look at. I've still got to finish up wiring off on the front of the engine. I think it pretty much will be time to get the drive shafts in, get the coolant system on the front, finalise that, and then potentially give it first startup. There's no point in rushing to make an exhaust system for it if on first startup it shits a VOD out. Shouldn't talk that one up, and I shouldn't really joke about it, but in hindsight this is something you have to prepare yourself for. It's an engine I've built. Until you've done first startup, you never truly know what it's going to do. So I'm not going to lie, I'm still bricking it a little bit as well, even though I've done the likes of the forged engine and previous engines in the past. It always feels like a big roll of the dice when you turn the keys for the first time on something like that. So turned it over by hand, it feels like it's good, but again, until it's got the stresses of combustion and stuff like that actually going on the engine, the heat and stuff, we don't know what it's going to do. So that's going to be it for this episode. As per normal, cheers for watching, guys. I'll catch you later. Catch you later, not later. Give us a like and subscribe if you wouldn't mind. And yeah, join me for the next episode. So that'll be next weekend. And I will try and do that as one long episode to finalise this project. I've got 4 days off work. I'm going to hit the fucking thing hard. I want it back on the road. So yeah, join me next weekend and hopefully we see that happen. Catch you later, gang.